About 5 kilometers to the west of Arnhem, in a space 1,500 yards by 900 on that last day, I saw the dead and the living. Those who fought a good fight and kept the faith with you at home, and those who still fought magnificently on. They were the last of the few. I last saw them yesterday morning as they dribbled into Nijmegen. They had staggered and walked and waited all night from Arnhem, about 10 miles north, and we were busy asking each other if this or that one had been seen. Everyone wondered what the final checkup would amount to. I walked up to one young lieutenant to ask him about his sergeant, a stout lad if there ever was one, and he started to explain what had happened and then turned away. Remember, all of these men had been practically 10 days and 10 nights under the most murderous concentrated fire I've seen in 2 wars. Then he turned again and said, "It's hell to be pulled out when you haven't finished your job, isn't it?" That's the way they all felt. It doesn't occur to them that if they hadn't held that horde of enemy force at Arnhem, that force would have been down at Nijmegen, upsetting the whole apple cart. That was yesterday morning. Late on the afternoon before, we were told that the remnants of the 1st Airborne Division were going to pull out that night. The enemy was making it impossible for the elements of the 2nd Army to relieve us. BBC's Guy Byam, Alan Woods of the Daily Express, and I were told by Major Roy Oliver of the Public Relations Division, who incidentally proved himself a great soldier as well, we were told to destroy all our equipment with the exception of what would go into one haversack. We were told to muffle our boots with bits of blanket and be ready to move off at a certain time. When the various officers were told to transmit this news to that thin straggle of hard-pressed men around the pitifully small perimeter, a great silence seemed to come upon them, even in the middle of the shelling. You see, day or night, the shelling and mortaring never stopped. The ones I saw just drew a deep breath and said, "Very good, sir." Then those staring eyes in the middle of black muddy masks saluted as they always would and faded away to crawl out on their stomachs and tell their men. Perhaps I should remind you here that these were men of no ordinary caliber. They'd been 9 days in that little space I mentioned, being mortared and shelled, machine-gunned and sniped from all around. When a tank or a self-propelled 88 gun broke through, 2 or 3 of them detached themselves and somehow or another had put it out of business. For the last 3 days, they had had no water, very little but small arms ammunition, and rations cut to 1/6. Luckily or unluckily, it rained, and they caught the water in their capes and drank that. These last items were never mentioned. They were airborne, weren't they? They were tough and knew it. All right, water and rations didn't matter. Give them some Germans to kill, and even 1 chance in 10, and they'd get along somehow. Well, at 2 minutes past 10, we clambered out of our slit trenches in an absolute din of bombardment, a great deal of it our own, and formed up in a single line. Our boots were wrapped in blankets so that no noise would be made. We held the tail of the coat of the man in front. We set off like a file of nebulous ghosts from our pockmarked and tree-strewn piece of ground. Obviously, since the enemy was all round us, we had to go through him to get to the river Rhine. After about 200 yards of silent trekking, we knew we were among the enemy. It was difficult not to throw yourself flat when machine gun tracers skimmed your head, or the scream of a shell or mortar bomb sounded very close. But the orders were to keep going. Anybody hit was to be picked up by the man behind him. Major Oliver had reconnoitered the route earlier on with a headquarters officer and had it memorized. The back of my neck was prickling for that whole interminable march. I couldn't see the man ahead of me. All I knew was that I had hold of a coat-tail, and for the first time in my life was grateful for the downpour of rain that made a patter on the leaves of the trees and covered up any little noises we were making. At every turn of the way, there was posted a sergeant glider pilot who stepped out like a shadow and then stepped back into a deeper shadow again. Several times we halted, which meant you bumped into the man ahead of you. Then, when the head of our party was satisfied, the turning was clear, we went on again. Once we halted because of a boy sitting on the ground with a bullet through his leg. We wanted to pick him up, but he whispered, Knock it. Give me another field dressing and I'll be all right. I can walk. As we came out of the trees, we'd been following carefully thought-out footpaths so far, I felt as naked as if I were in Piccadilly Circus in my pajamas because of the glow from fires across the river. The machine gun and general bombardment had never let up. We lay down flat in the mud and rain and stayed that way for 2 hours till the sentry beyond the hedge on the bank of the river told us to move up over the dike and be taken across. Mortaring started now, and I was fearful for those that were already over on the bank. I guess it was pretty bad for them. After what seemed a nightmare of an age, we got our turn and slithered up and over onto some mud flats. There was the shadow of a little assault craft with an outboard motor on it. Several of these had been rushed up by a field company of engineers. 1 or 2 of them were out of action already. We waded out into the Rhine up to our hips. It didn't matter. I was soaked through long ago, had been for days. And a voice that was sheer music spoke up from the stern of the boat, saying, "You'll have to step lively, boys. 'Tain't healthy here." It was a Canadian voice, and the engineers were Canadian engineers. We helped push the boat off into the swift Rhine current, and with our heads down between our knees, waited for the bump on the far side, or for what might come before. It didn't come. We clambered out and followed what had been a white tape up over a dike. We slid down the other side on our backsides, and we sloshed through mud for 4.5 miles, me thinking, gosh, I'm alive. How did it happen? In a barn, there was a blessed hot mug of tea with rum in it and a blanket over our shoulders, and then we walked again all night. After daylight, we got to a dressing station near Nijmegen, and then we were put in trucks, and that's how we reached Nijmegen. That's how the last of the few got out to go in and fight in some future battle. And no matter what battle that is, I know they won't let you down.
You have been listening to Sound Pictures from Europe, a program assembled in England by the London